surprised by that because I'd seen all this bedwetting stuff on ABC and in the Sydney Morning Herald and the BBC, all this alphabet soup of rather strange television and radio stations. So I asked the Department of Defence to let me have some pictures of the dew line radar stations on the northern scarp of the Greenland ice sheet, as it was in the time when they were operating, which was kind of 40 years ago now in the Cold War, and then how they are now. So on the left you have two stations as they were, on the right as they were much, much more recently. And I think that what you will see there is a very considerable accumulation of snow and firn and ice around those stations. It is possible that to some extent they may have sunk a little because they're quite heavy and ice is elastic. We do have to allow for that. But nevertheless, it is very clear that the ice is indeed rapidly accumulating exactly as Johannesson et al. Had actually found. But only recently there was a paper saying by Dale Jensen, whom I met actually in Denmark at Copenhagen, that the ice from Greenland was pouring into the sea and had been for the last 2 years at an unprecedented rate. And then there's been reports from the British Antarctic Survey saying that now, not only in West Antarctica but in East Antarctica, the glaciers are pouring into the sea at an unprecedented rate. Trillions and trillions and trillions and tons of ice melting away because of the global warming, which, as you saw from the record there, hasn't been happening. So I thought to myself, right, the global warming hasn't been happening, yet the ice has been disappearing. Wonder where it went then. And I thought, did it perhaps go into sea level rise? Has there been a huge spurt in sea level rise as a result of all these trillions of tons of melting ice? Well, we're going to look at that in a moment. But before we do, let's just look at another thing to do with the Himalayas. Most of the water supply of the billion people that depend on the cryosphere, that's the ice bit of the Earth, comes not from melting glacial ice. Hardly any of it comes from that. Nearly all of it comes from Eurasian snow cover. And if anyone has been to Britain recently, or Europe recently, or North America recently, you will see snow where you've never seen it before. There is no shortage whatever in snow cover, and there has been no trend in snow cover in the last 30 or 40 years until this year, when there has been a very substantial increase in it. Here is the Antarctic sea ice, a very interesting increasing trend over the last 30 years. And just 3 weeks after the 2007 30-year minimum in Arctic sea ice, there was a 30-year maximum in Antarctic sea ice. How many saw that maximum reported? Not one, I think. So we're seeing selective reporting here. Here's the truth. Here we compile the Arctic and Antarctic sea ice records into a single record, and you'll see it's a heartbeat. If you had a cardiograph as regular and healthy as this, you would be a good little planet and you'd be allowed to go out to play. Hurricanes. Oh, yes, it's all terrible, the hurricanes. Once again, the UN has had to admit that hurricanes are not, in fact, going to increase because of global warming. One of the reasons why is this very determined, very scholarly man, Ryan Maui, who produced this graph here at Florida State University, which shows that hurricanes have recently reached their lowest activity level in the 50 years since they first began keeping detailed records, and in the 30 years, which you see here, since satellite records began, which are the most accurate records we've got. So none of that, I put it to you, corresponds with what we're being told in the newspapers, but what I've given you there is the actual data rather than my interpretation of the actual data. Why? Because most of you are not children, and if I tell you what the facts are, you are grown up enough to make what you will of those facts without me telling you what they actually mean. And it's high time that we got back in this debate to just giving the people the facts, instead of giving them opinions, most of which are wrong, based on facts which are also wrong because they never even bothered to check them. So now I want to do very quickly a little outline of the economic situation here. Because if you do anything like an emissions trading scheme or a carbon tax or any other way of interfering with making cheap energy available, especially to the poorest, then all that happens is you achieve absolutely nothing, but you do it at a cost which is stunningly disproportionate. And this little sum here, which I'm not proposing to go through in detail, but I'll happily let anybody have a copy of it afterwards, shows that if we were to shut down the entire global economy, just shut it down altogether for 40 years, then in that time we might have managed to forestall 1 Celsius degree of warming. Just 1 Celsius degree of the 3 or 4 Celsius degrees, or even 5 or 6 or 7, that the UN says might happen by the end of this century, even though temperatures have been going down ever since the century began. But that's what they're saying. 1 Celsius degree is all that we would forestall if we shut down the entire world economy altogether for 41 years. Now, how many people do you think would end up dead if that's what we did to the world economy? That's the cost of trying to tinker, even in a little way, with the emissions of carbon dioxide that we are making, which, as I shall show you later, are harmless. The fact is, there is absolutely no way that anyone except Lord Stern, who is mad, that's the technical term for him, anybody else knows perfectly well that it is orders of magnitude cheaper to adapt to climate change if and when it happens than to try to mitigate it. In any case, if we try to mitigate it, we're not going to get very far, because this slide here showing China and what it proposes to do, and that graph there is based on China's annual statistical communiques of the Peking regime. They publish them once a year. Anyone can read them. You can get them on the Chinese government's website. And it tells you just how much carbon they are planning to emit. And you can see that the Western world, the United States there and all the rest of us down the bottom, are basically no longer going to be part of the solution because we're no longer going to be part of the problem. There's nothing we can do about this. And that we should just understand our limitations now. We are not the kings of the world anymore. China is going to be that. Here is what would have happened if everybody followed Kyoto. Practically no difference compared with if nobody had bothered at all. In fact, since nobody has bothered at all, it's made no difference at all. In fact, it has gone up. The carbon emissions that were supposed to be the same as they were in 1990 by 2012, which the last time I looked was just 2 years away, it's actually gone up by 40%. That's the terrific international movement to cure the climate and to deal with the moral challenge of our generation. And we've succeeded in increasing the hot air count by 40%. And here is the Waxman-Markey bill that they're trying to do in the United States. I show this to you because if you're trying to do an ETS in a country with a population 1/10 or 1/12 of that of the United States, the difference you're going to make to the climate is even less than this. And there it is, the effect on sea level. You simply won't be able to measure the difference with any instrument known to man. And once again, I reinforce the point that if you feel you've got to do anything at all about global warming, you wait and you see. And then you adapt to the situation that develops, because that is orders of magnitude more cost-effective than trying to stop emissions from happening in the first place. That is the socially, politically, economically, and scientifically responsible course. All right, you might say, but suppose that we just decided we ought to do something anyway because we're terrified that we might have got this wrong. Even if everybody complied with the Copenhagen Accord between now and 2020 by reducing carbon emissions in the West by 30%. The reduction in global temperatures that would result by the end of those 10 years would be somewhere between 0.02 and 0.1 Celsius degrees at a cost of trillions. Is there anybody here who thinks that is in any way sensible? No, I didn't think so. Well, now the political cost. I've been asked by a lot of you, because I had the pleasure of shaking some of you by the hand on your way in, to talk about the conspiracy, as it's been put, to establish a world government. Now, one thing is, I'm not going to call it a conspiracy because these people couldn't organize their way out of a paper bag. So what I am going to do is to give you evidence of what they were actually planning to do from the published document in which I found it. They were going to set up a world government. On September the 15th, they produced a draft of what was going to be, but thank goodness wasn't in the end, the Copenhagen Treaty. And there you will see 3 basic pillars: government, a facilitative mechanism. That meant goons going round to make sure that any recalcitrant governments did what they were told by the new